The following is a Hoop Ball presentation. Welcome to the Fantasy NBA Today podcast.
Fantasy, and I mean Fantasy NBA Today, continues here on free agency weeks. We dig into the actual fantasy implications of all of the signings from week one here in week two of our free agency period. Dan Besbris, Adrian Benjamin's with you, your Tuesday edition of the podcast. Of course, you can follow us on Twitter at Dan Besbris, at Adrian Benjamins. If you can spell it, you can follow us. That's the rule. This is a Hoop Ball presentation at Hoop Ball Fantasy, at Hoop Ball Tweets. And it's reasonable, finally now, for me to include that Twitter handle because after last week, we spent the bulk of the 5 days just talking about the madness of free agency. And this week, we're finally getting into what it means for the individual players, and we're going to do that momentarily. But first, Adrian, my man, I haven't talked to you in a couple of days. How's life? How you living?
Life is good, Dan. It's really hot in Southern California right now. I mean, you're right here too, and I'm sweating like a dog over here.
Okay, I got to know. You're in Manhattan Beach, right?
No, actually in Long Beach.
Oh,
now.
the LBC, the land of Snoop D.O. Double. What's the temperature like down there these days?
Well, on Friday it was a crazy 109 degrees.
Holy.
I didn't even know it was possible to get that hot.
That's
in Long Beach.
Crazy. You guys are in close proximity to the ocean. It should never be that hot that close to the water.
Exactly. And right now as I speak, it's about 75 degrees, which isn't that bad. I don't know why, man. My house is just it feels like a sauna.
You know what? The walls, I know that this is like it sounds like I'm going to be spinning some weird like wizard gibberish here, but the walls really do retain heat in the summertime. So the house tends to stay warm or cold, whatever it happens to be, a bit longer than the temperatures fluctuating outside. But we should also mention, by the way, to those of you listening into the podcast, Adrian and I are talking at 9 p.m. on the Pacific Coast. So the fact that it's still in the mid-70s for you right near the water, that's pretty warm. Today was when things, by the way, started to come back a little bit closer to normal. I have to admit, I have it good. I'm in a neighborhood called Brentwood in Southern California. It's very close to Santa Monica. A lot of people have heard of that city. And we're right on the border of Brentwood and Santa Monica, I think it's about 3 miles as the crow flies from the Pacific Ocean. So it never got, even on the hottest day, and Friday was like, that was completely bonkers. I don't think it ever got hotter than 95 here. So I consider myself fortunate. Saturday, I think, was like 91. Sunday, I think, was about the same. And then today, it was like mid-80s. It really not that bad at all. But there are parts here in Southern California that set the record. This is like, there's nothing to do with fantasy basketball, but it is worth noting that most of Southern California broke the all-time high for whatever date Friday was. Was that the 6th? No. Yes, Friday was the 6th. And it set the record all across Southern California. It was like 3 degrees hotter than any July 6th on record. That's ridiculous. My parents live in an area known as the San Fernando Valley. Southern Californianites know what I'm talking about. And it was 114 out there. Our power did not go out, I'm thrilled to say. But it was like, yeah, that was nuts. And it made me think, man, this is like the day I'm really glad that I'm not calling a baseball game in Bakersfield. One of those moments that you have to get slapped in the face with brutal heat to remind yourself that baseball's fun, but sometimes it's okay to just sit in front of an air conditioning unit.
Yeah, for sure. I'm just not used to the heat. I live close to the coast, so we always got that ocean breeze. And I was shocked on Friday, man. I came out of my office, and in the shade, it was 102 degrees in the shade. I couldn't believe it. So, we live in this weird bubble here, Dan, where like when it rains, we freak out. When there's any heat, we freak out. Like I feel bad even complaining about it. There's people living in places that have to deal with real weather. So I should not complain. I'm going to keep my mouth shut now.
Yeah, in general, life is pretty easy for us down here, but it was freaking hot, and so we're going to complain about it, and everybody just has to deal with that. Fantasy stuff. Here's what we're doing, by the way. For those that missed yesterday's podcast, just a quick recap. I talked about the newest signings, the most interesting ones that happened over the weekend, in particular, Brook Lopez and Zach LaVine. Zach going back to the Chicago Bulls, Brook Lopez moving over to the Milwaukee Bucks, and just breaking them down in extremely long-form terms. And that's our project here over the next, basically, week, because each individual player is probably going to take anywhere from like 4 to 8 minutes. And we're not going to talk about guys like, and I joked on yesterday's pod, Zaza Pachulia, because he's not going to play in Detroit. So we're not going to waste our time with it. But, last week we didn't really ever talk about what a move to the Lakers means for LeBron James from a fantasy perspective. We didn't talk about what's going on with the Houston Rockets. They've now lost 2 of their 3 wing defenders. So what is that? CP3's back there long-term with his brittle body. What does that mean? So, we're going to get into this stuff. We're not going to draw long lines away from it. That's the point that I really wanted to make with this kind of intro, if you want to call it that. When we start to talk about LeBron, for instance, on today's podcast, we're not going to talk about Kevin Love and George Hill and J.R. Smith and Kyle Korver and the rest of the Lakers, all of the guys that he's joining. We're going to talk about LeBron. What does this mean for specifically the King? Because that's enough. If you get into talking about the Lakers and the Cavs as part of your LeBron discussion, that's a 45-minute show very quickly, and you haven't covered more than one guy. We will, however, when we do our review of all of the teams in the NBA, that'll be starting next week, most likely, we'll talk about the Lakers, and we'll talk about the Cavs, and that's when we can get into all those other dudes as well. But on today's show, tomorrow, Thursday, Friday, you name it, we're going to be talking about the player, the guy that got signed, the stuff that's happened around them, what are the expectations moving forward, where are we looking to draft them, if at all, and then, of course, we'll move on to the next guy. So, Adrian, I feel like you have honors because I yammered to myself for a long time on yesterday's podcast. Who do you want to talk about first? Who's our first guy today?
Well, you brought up LeBron James. He was arguably the biggest name in free agency. Let's start there. Let's start with the King.
The King.
In his new city of Los Angeles. For fantasy purposes, Dan, what do you think? This is a guy, he had a career year. And for the first time ever in his career, didn't sit a single game, just put up outstanding numbers all across the board. What are your expectations for him in Los Angeles?
I expect a dip in year one. Are you with me on that one?
Okay, I am with you in the aspect that the Cavs were desperately trying to win last year. We're not really expecting the Lakers to contend for a title. So you kind of wonder if the Lakers are going to lean on LeBron as heavily as the Cavs did. You felt like LeBron, the season he went through last year was like going through 2 seasons almost for him because he played so many minutes.
Oh my God, you're so right.
Deep in the playoffs, right?
It's insane the number of games that dude played. He played every game in the regular season. He played every game in the playoffs, and there were some 7-game series in that. Like that was crazy. Can anybody else in the NBA even consider doing that? Especially, let alone somebody who's in their now mid-30s. That was an unbelievable accomplishment from a durability standpoint. That guy's such a freak, it's crazy.
There were games in the playoffs where he sat maybe just a few minutes. It was unreal. So, I think a lot of people are kind of considering this season of the Lakers a lost season, meaning they didn't get that second guy yet to go with LeBron. So I think the Lakers are kind of more looking at next year as the year. Like, hey, maybe we can really make a run and contend in 2019. So I kind of got a sneaky suspicion that they're going to take it easy on LeBron. So in that aspect, when you say you expect a dip, I do expect a dip there. Now, I do think LeBron is still going to be the do-it-all, number one alpha, leader of the team. And I think he's kind of, when you come into a new setting and you kind of get some new juice, your legs feel a little rejuvenated. You kind of feel like you got something to prove, like, hey, I came here on this new team, but I'm still the king. So I think LeBron's going to be motivated to still put up some pretty good numbers. What do you think, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to be bad. There's never going to be a truly bad season for LeBron James, but I have this weird notion, and I talked a little bit about it on our Lakers pod, which, by the way, you can follow at HoopBallLakers. We have a podcast out from late last week that's still very relevant because, well, nothing has changed for the Lakers since late last week, where I just suggested that there's a possibility that LeBron is just going to sort of take it easy this year, that this is like the cooling year for him. He's been to the finals 8 consecutive times. The mileage on that dude is out of control. So I'm expecting some rest days. Unquestionably, he will be taking some rest days. And I think there'll be, I don't want to say a substantial amount of them because the NBA's gone so far out of its way to stretch the schedule and to try to alleviate some of that stuff. But he's accomplished everything. Nobody is faulting him for going to LA. Like the first time he left Cleveland, he was vilified. I mean, he was burned in effigy in Cleveland when he left town. Nobody cared this time around. It's like, you know what, LeBron, he's the king. He's done everything now. Go do whatever the hell you want. And I think for the Lakers, that we've seen the moves they've made. They've surrounded him with these guys that seem like total cockeyed fits, but the real theme is they surrounded him with guys that'll beat you up and guys that can pass. Not necessarily guys that can shoot. There's almost none of that on the Lakers, but they can pass. Where all of Rondo has his deficiencies, he's still a good passer. And Lance Stevenson he's terrible at everything. Forget him. I'm just going to wipe him out of this discussion. But LeBron's around guys. Brandon Ingram, he's come along with passing. Lonzo Ball, very good passer. This is, to me, a sign of the Lakers saying, look, LeBron, we're going to take a little bit of the playmaking duties off of your shoulder. We're going to just try to beat people up. If you want to get out and run, if you want to cherry pick a little bit, we're going to have a bunch of guys that can get the rebound and flick it out to you. It's not going to have to be you going 80 some odd feet from, hoop to hoop every single time. An interesting stat, Adrian, that surprised me a little bit was that the Cavs are generally in the bottom, 20% of the NBA in pace. LeBron teams in general, I should say, the Cavs and the Heat. He's so fast. It caught me off guard to know that his teams almost never run, and it's just because when you look at them, the guys around him are always these beat up old goats that can shoot but can't really play at a quick pace. They can't pass. They can't dribble. The Lakers are going to be very different. They're going to try to take a little bit of that deep burden off of LeBron, which is great for his 2019 prospects, but in my opinion, it does say in sort of bright, bold letters, we're going to dial you back a little. We're going to try to make you a slightly lower usage guy for a year. Let's save our strength, and let's make a run at it the following year and the year after that, and maybe even the year after that. And so I think you have to knock him down a little bit. The question, I guess, is how much?
So that's a good question. And LeBron was so spectacular last season that in 8 category leads, when you take turnovers out, he was the number 2 player in fantasy. So how far of a dip are we expecting from this guy? Now, you mentioned pace, and the Lakers were known last season to be a pretty fast-paced team. They had they ran their offense at a pretty good pace. So I'm curious if this could help LeBron's numbers, being in that kind of a setting. I don't know, Dan. I'm curious, even if he falls a little bit, will he still finish as a top 5 player, for sure a top 10 player, right? So, I mean, we're still drafting this guy easy in the first round. And for me, it might be more like after the elite guys come off the board, your Anthony Davis, Karl Anthony Towns, James Harden. He's right there. He's like the next guy you take after that.
You're talking 8-cat right now?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think in 9-cat, I'm dropping him back a little bit. In 9-cat, he was... Okay, by totals, he was number 3, but that's because he played all 82 games, and I really don't see that happening again. On a per-game basis, LeBron had, by all accounts, one of his best years, actually, in the NBA, and he was still number 6 on a per-game basis. He was behind AD, Steph, Kevin Durant, James Harden, and Karl Anthony Towns, and he was, a little, substantially behind the top 4, which, again, Steph, KD, and James Harden were, in their own right, substantially behind Anthony Davis. But if you can kind of cluster those guys, then there's a decent drop for Cat, then another decent drop to the LeBron, Giannis, Dame, Chris Paul grouping. Most of LeBron's value in both 8 or 9-cat comes on the shoulders of him being the primary ball handler and shooter on his team. He needs to be that guy because he was an ultra-high volume 54% from the field. He had one of, if not the greatest, positive field goal percent impacts in the NBA. I think Clint Capella and Steven Adams might have actually been the only 2 dudes in the NBA who were better, who had a greater positive impact on field goal percent than LeBron James. He was more important to your field goal percent than DeAndre Jordan, which is mind-boggling, but that's because he has to take 19 shots a game. Assists at 9.1. He was among the best in the NBA. He was behind Russell Westbrook and then a couple of basically assist specialist type guys, but he was in the top 3, I think, in assists per game as well. And rebounds at 8.6. I mean, this is a guy that needed to be elbow deep in everything that happened to create his value. His turnovers were to his detriment, but not obscene. He's a bad foul shooter. That's never really come around. I do appreciate the fact that he changed his stroke a little bit, but 27.5 points per game, almost 2 3-pointers, 9 rebounds, 9 assists, 1.4 steals, a block, 54% shooting. I don't know how he keeps that up on a team where there are other guys that actually want to be involved. I mean, with Cleveland, look at that roster. That was Kevin Love, and then who was even willing to take a shot on that team beyond Kevin Love? J.R. Smith? I mean, you're talking about guys that averaged 7 to 9 shots per game. The Lakers actually have some guys on this club that can get shots up. Kuzma, Ingram, there's an actual list of guys that'll do stuff on offense. I think I've got to move LeBron behind Giannis. I don't know about moving him behind Damian Lillard. I mean, there's a pretty good drop-off there. A healthy Chris Paul in Houston, we'll talk about him momentarily, but I think he goes back towards the end of the top 10 for me instead of the middle of the top 10, which is where he was this year. And I know that doesn't sound like a huge drop, but it's pretty significant when you talk about the actual impact. The difference between the number 5 guy and the number 9 or 10 guy is actually pretty substantial in fantasy sports, and I have to drop him back. I just don't believe the Lakers are going to run him the way the Cavs did.
Well, it's really interesting because I do definitely agree with you that, the Lakers are going to take it easy on him. They've definitely got a plan that they have in mind. It's a long-term plan. They don't want to, they want to save him for that. So I do agree with you. I still foresee him having an amazing season. I think he's going to just have this little extra motivation being in LA, kind of wanting to prove that he's still the man. So I think he's still going to be great. I do agree that we may see a small dip, but as you said, just put him right there after that first elite tier of guys. He's right after that for me. But yeah, he's going to have a great season, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited for the year. I don't think I'm taking him any earlier than 9 in a 9-cat format. I don't think I'm taking him any earlier than 9. I think there's going to be a usage dip, and his maxing him out on the offensive end is the means to an end for LeBron. And if some of that comes away, which I'm sure he'd be thrilled with to do a little less, I do think that guys like, I mean, maybe there's room for a guy like Nikola Jokic to make some improvement. Maybe there's room for Victor Oladipo. Nah, probably not. That's probably about as good as it gets. But we've seen Chris Paul be better than number 9. Giannis, I think there's room for some improvement there. And then I don't think LeBron there's almost any way he moves up from where he was this last year. So if I'm dipping him down a little bit, then my best case scenario for him is probably the number 7 or 8 guy. So I'd rather take him slightly after that. So, yeah, that's where I sit on that one. I feel like he's going to I feel like there's going to be a little bit of a chilled out season for him. What about Chris Paul? I mentioned his name a moment ago. He just re-upped for $160 million in Houston. And I know we said we weren't going to get into the other guys around him, but we do now know that 2 of their wing guys are gone. Luke Baumute, Trevor Ariza, they're out of the picture. For Chris Paul, though, Adrian, doesn't it really come down to whether or not he can play 70-plus games in a year? He's been pretty beat up lately.
That's what it all comes down to, Dan. I mean, this guy is a proven elite player, and he produces as long as he's healthy. But being healthy is the main question mark. We've seen him miss time over and over again, and I don't trust him, Dan. I don't trust him for fantasy. I just don't think he's gonna be there when you need him. And I think that this team's going to kind of take it easy on him. I think they know big picture that they're playing, that their goal is to win a title. They had the best record in the NBA this past season, and what did it get them? So I think they're going to take it easy on Chris Paul. And why not? They've got another great guy who can handle the ball in James Harden. And so I'm fading Chris Paul for fantasy, Dan. What do you think?
I'm with you. We've seen it now. You know me. I like to go after guys that are coming off of what you'd consider to be down seasons. And Chris Paul is that. He only played 58 games this year. He only played 61 games the previous season with the Clippers. He played 74 games the year before that. He actually did play 82 games, 2014, 2015, but that has actually been the exception and not the rule. There's a lot of 60-somethings and 70-somethings, and now we've got ourselves a 50-something this last year. He does get hurt. He got hurt again in the playoffs, and that's not even an injury that shows up when you look at his regular season stats. He really struggles to play more than 15 to 20 games in a row without something blowing out. There's a lot of miles on him. He played college ball. He's 33. He's LeBron age, but he's not an android like LeBron. So you have to sort of treat Chris Paul the way you would a normal 30-something-year-old point guard. He's still incredibly efficient. That part of his game, it doesn't look like is ever going away. He took about 13 to 14 shots per game, same deal that he had in his last season with the Clippers. He's an unbelievably strong foul shooter. He's always among the league leaders in steals. But playing alongside James Harden, who generally pretty durable, also taking its toll on Chris Paul. He's not going to be a 20-point-per-game guy. He's not going to be a 10-assist guy anymore. Those days are just sort of behind him, as long as he's the number 2 dude on the Houston Rockets, and he will be. So, yeah, I'm with you looking at his stats from this most recent season. Even if you ignore the games played, you're just talking about a guy who has a new role, and he's a guy that his efficiency is obviously one of the biggest keys to his fantasy success, but also he creates that efficiency by being so good with the basketball and by creating with the basketball. And if the basketball is not in his hands, then great, fantastic efficiency, but the assists are down, the steals are down, the shots are down, all that other stuff is down. It just doesn't balance it out. So, I think there's a universe where he does move past Damian Lillard on a per-game basis. Those two guys were basically neck and neck this past year. But he, like LeBron James, is not a guy that I'm taking before you hit double digits. I'm not taking Chris Paul before the 10th pick, and I probably would prefer to take him in the second round because of the injury risk. If he falls far enough, you have to take him, though, don't you? Like, you can't just put him on the don't draft list.
Yeah, if he falls, I agree with you. If he's there in the second round, more towards the end of the second round for me, I would look for him. But, I mean, I'm not taking him before, Damian Lillard, Steph Curry, Russell Westbrook are the point guards you're going to take on the board before him. I'll take Victor Oladipo before I take him. So there's a very good chance somebody's going to take him off the board before I get there. But Dan, I got a question for you. I know we're not supposed to be talking about these other guys, but really interesting to me that this team was so close. They were right there on the door, knocking on that door to beat Golden State. They lost Chris Paul for those final two games. Some people say if Chris Paul was there, maybe it would have been the Rockets. We felt in this offseason that they needed to keep their core together and maybe try to add a piece because they were so close. Not only did they lose Trevor Ariza, they lost another guy today, Luke Mbah Amute, they lost. And now they have a disgruntled Clint Capella, who we hear is not happy because he hasn't gotten that contract offer that he wanted. He feels like he outplayed a lot of the centers in the West during the playoffs, guys like Karl Anthony Towns. He feels like he deserves to get paid. So what are your thoughts on it feels like this team has taken a huge step back? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of have to talk about that a little bit because the Luke Mbah thing took place on Monday. So that is fresh stuff. Of course, for those that didn't hear, he signed with the Clippers for a year, which raises all sorts of crazy questions about what they're actually trying to do in Clipperland. But yeah, this stings, man. The Rockets, what they had been able to do this season, they built their team around Harden and Paul, who could orchestrate the offense, and nobody can really stop those guys. And defensively, they shored things up by bringing in all these tough dudes. PJ Tucker joining Ariza, Luke Mbah, Clint Capella. This stings, man. This gives the Warriors a little bit more breathing room. Forget the DeMarcus Cousins stuff. With Clint Capella, he'll be fine. I mean, I know the rumors are surfacing that he's annoyed with the process, but look, this is how it's played out for him. I don't know how he can get upset with the Rockets. They're just not negotiating against themselves right now. They're waiting until somebody gives Clint a big-ass offer, and then they're going to go and match it. They've said that. We'll match it. You guys give him an offer, we're going to match it. So I think everything will work out okay for Capella. Somebody's going to give him a big offer. The only way that things get weird is if no one offers Capella a contract, and then the Rockets actually do have to negotiate with Clint. If that doesn't go well, then he can start to get a little bit irritated. But right now, it's just part of the process. Rockets are waiting, and they're doing the smart thing. And I'm hoping that somebody has said that to Clint. I'm guessing that his agent did. It was like, look, they're just waiting. We got to get you an offer, and then everything's going to be cool. But they're not just going to throw a number out there because this is a business. I think he'll be okay. I think the Rockets are going to still be a really good team. But yeah, the loss of two of their tough guys, that does sting a little bit. Let's move on to player number 3 here, and we're just knocking out the biggest contracts of the offseason. That's Paul George, who opted to go back to the Thunder. Things shouldn't change a whole lot for him. I mean, he does have now a lot of financial security. He seems to be quite content being Russell Westbrook's second fiddle, being the guy that doesn't draw any blame when the games are going poorly, it all ends up, of course, on Russ. Is there any reason to think that next year should be different for Paul George? I mean, this was a strong year. Big-time steals numbers that did taper off a bit as the season went on because, averaging 3 steals for a whole year is impossible. 22 points, 3 threes, 6 boards, low field goal percent because he takes a ton of shots from downtown. They didn't, from an offensive standpoint, they didn't change much. Melo is likely to be bought out. Does that mean there's more meat on the bone for Paul George? Could he really take more than 17 shots a night? I don't know.
I was pleasantly surprised by Paul George last season. He was a player that I was fading in all my leagues because we saw what Russell Westbrook did to Victor Oladipo. Russell Westbrook is a black hole of usage, and I was really scared. Also, they also added Melo last season, so I was really scared on Paul George's outlook, and he proved me wrong. What a great season he had. He proved that he could thrive next to Russell Westbrook. As you mentioned, his decision to stay in OKC, he's completely happy being Robin to Russell Westbrook's Batman. So I feel like Paul George, super safe guy for fantasy. I think he's a safe second-round target. In 8 category leagues, I believe he finished as the overall number 12 player. As you mentioned, with Melo out the door, I think Paul George is going to be leaned upon a little bit more in the offense. So, maybe he can pick up his scoring. And I really like his outlook, Dan. Also, I like some of the moves that the Thunder have made. I think they've made a lot of moves to support Paul George and Russell Westbrook, bringing in a guy like Nerlens Noel and, bringing in their decision to keep Jeremy Grant there as well. So I really like Paul George's outlook, Dan.
I need to correct you on one thing. Paul George is not Robin to Russell Westbrook's Batman. Because Russell Westbrook is both Batman and Robin on that team, and Paul George is definitely Alfred. Russell Westbrook is all of the superheroes rolled into one, and that, I think, is part of why Paul George kind of likes being there, is that you can't get mad at Alfred, right? Like, you can get mad at Robin, sort of. Like, Robin, you bonehead. But if Alfred, he's Alfred. You can't get mad at Alfred, and I think Paul George likes that role. But yes, from a fantasy standpoint, he's safe. He was number 16, by the way, in 9-cat league, while we fill in both halves of the 9 and 8-cat stuff. He did peel off a little bit. He was sitting inside the top 12 for a while this year. Not surprisingly, some of those numbers did normalize. But overall, looking at the season as a whole for him, it was solid and repeatable. There's no reason to think that he can't just do the same thing again. The only worry, I guess, is that he got paid. Will there be the same fire? And I think the answer to that is yes, because Oklahoma City feels sort of spurned by the national media. They got mocked for spending like $35 billion on their team after just getting waxed by the Utah Jazz and Joe Ingles in round 1. So they're a little bit of a laughingstock, despite having Westbrook and Paul George and all this bucket of goodies out there. So I think they're going to be pissed. I think they're going to play hard, and I think that augurs well for Paul George's fantasy standpoints. I think he ends up right in that same spot. Very safe second-round pick, and one of the very few guys this year drafted near the second round that actually performed like a second-round guy who played most of the season. So kudos to Paul George. He held his own. Let's do one or two more guys, and then we'll wrap this thing up. Adrian, your choice. Where are we going next? Just one or two more free agents for today's pod.
So I wanted to talk about a guy, Tyreke Evans, who has made the move over to the Indiana Pacers. This is a guy, we usually avoid guys like this due to his injury concerns. I don't trust him injury-wise, but I was able to pick him up in quite a bit of leagues last season off the wire, and he really, when he played very well. And helped me in a lot of leagues. And I'm really curious to hear what your outlook is on him joining a team that we like a lot. I know you're a big fan of guys like Thaddeus Young. I love Victor Oladipo. We both are fans of Miles Turner's a guy that we may look at. How do you think? What do you think about Tyreke Evans' outlook fantasy wise and how he'd fit in with those guys?
I think he's going to be a little bit overdrafted. I like Tyreke Evans. I like his game. It seems to have evolved. He's become a much better shooter than he was early in his career. But I can't imagine that he's going to have the offensive opportunity in Indy that he had in Memphis. I mean, there was just nothing standing in his way with the Grizzlies. Conley was out. Gasol was playing half games sometimes. And then it was just this cavalry of weirdos around him. So they were just like, whatever, Reek, do whatever you want. And so he went for 25-5. I mean, that is alpha numbers on that team, and he's not going to be the alpha on the Pacers. He's probably going to be the Lou Williams-y type, where they bring him sixth man, first man off the bench, and he takes the burden off of Oladipo, off of Darren Collison. He's a guy that can create on offense, and as I said earlier, those guys are rare and useful. So I'm thinking we see a little bit of a statistical dip for Tyreke. I don't know specifically how much, and it's going to be obvious. It's going to be our job to figure that out. But he was the number 46 player on a per-game basis this year. I think a lot of the time he missed was tank-related, but not all of it. You know, there were some injuries mixed in there. So he's a guy that I'm looking at more towards that top 80 range and hoping that he can outperform that and give me top 65, top 70 kind of value.
Yeah, I really like the addition of Tyreke Evans on this team. Not so much for his fantasy value, but just from a reality standpoint, I think it's a great move. He said in an interview that teams won't be able to double team Victor Oladipo as much when he's out there because, you know, he can handle the ball really. It'll be really nice for that team to have another ball handler. I'm also really curious to see if he can play like a 6-man role for this team. So reality-wise, really like him for the addition to this team. And you know, the Pacers had a really great season, finished high in the Eastern Conference, took the Cavs to 7 games, almost won that series. So from a reality standpoint, this is a great, you know, they kind of had a hole in that small forward wing spot. So it'll be nice to plug him in there. I am too. I know, again, we're not really supposed to talk on these other guys. I'm a little bit worried about him taking a little bit away from Darren Collison and Victor Oladipo, just because I know he likes to have the ball in his hands. And so I really hope that we don't see any dip from those other guys. But I do really like this move, and I'm really curious to see how it all works.
Yeah, Pacers have made some good moves, and you know what, they have the luxury of having some cap space and also trying to build a little bit differently. It's not just we got to go get one superstar method, which is quite popular these days, and it's certainly a useful one. You know, a team like the Lakers needed a superstar. Pacers have a guy that was able to carry them already, so they were in a weird and unique position of not hunting a $40 million man, and they were able to turn their cash into a couple of kind of interesting side pieces to throw around Victor Oladipo and company. And if Miles Turner can actually make some progress this coming year, if he can show some growth, that's a team that could actually start to get into the conversation with the Phillies and the Bostons and the Torontos, and they're not getting, they don't get any credit at all. The Pacers, I've been on this pod many times talking about how I thought Pacers deserved some kind of award for this last year, a Coach of the Year, something. Victor Oladipo is getting all the recognition, but as a whole, they were a very impressive team this year, and I feel like nobody really cared about them. They ended up with 48 wins. They were only 2 back of the Cavs, 2 wins back of Cleveland, 4 wins back of Philadelphia. They were right there with some of these teams that we're talking about being the elite teams of the Eastern Conference. And now these clubs don't have to go through LeBron. What would the playoffs have looked like for them if not for LeBron going nuclear in Game 7 of that opening set. I mean, I like the Tyreke ad. It's only a 1-year deal, so if it doesn't pan out, no skin off their back. That's a fantastic one. Last guy. Let's talk about just one more guy before we wrap things up. And Adrian, since you and I are not going to talk together for a bit, and I'm doing my show solo tomorrow, I'm coming right back to you. Who's the last guy you want to talk about today?
Okay, last guy let's hit up is well, you know what? I was going to say Boogie Cousins, but we kind of already talked about Boogie Cousins
that
move happened.
That's a good one. I like that one. Let's do Boogie. It's a simple question.
Okay.
Would you draft him?
No, and mostly just because of his injury. Coming back from an Achilles is just we just don't know what's going to happen. We've heard word out of the organization is that they just want him to be ready for the playoffs, meaning, at what point will we even see him on the court? When we do, we're going to see him in limited minutes, Dan. He's not going to play in back-to-back. This is a team that's got 4 elite options. I mean, they don't need Boogie Cousins to be at full strength till the end of the season. I just don't trust them for fantasy at all.
Yep.
Dan.
Hard pass. I think the only universe where I would take a guy like Boogie Cousins is in a keeper league where there's a couple round penalty to keep a guy season over season. Like maybe you could get him in the 7th. I don't know. I mean, do you think I assume the drafting will be a little bit different in a keeper league. Someone would probably take him and just stash him on their bench for the entire year. I'm in a keeper league where there's a 2-round penalty for the following season. So if I could get Boogie, basically anything after the 4th round, it would be great for next year, the following season, the 2019-20 year. But I'm not going to use up a 4th round pick on him this season. I still have to try to win this one before thinking about the next one. But damn, I think I'd be willing to throw away a 7th or 8th round pick on Boogie and just not even worry if he plays a game the entire year, and then just hope that he's 2nd or 3rd round pick value, 2nd or 3rd round value 2 years down the line, and I give up a 5th, 6th round pick to keep him. That's the only universe where I think you draft Boogie Cousins or dynasty, something like that. I don't know if he'd fall back into the pool there, but in a redraft league. I'm with you, man. I'm 100% with you, Adrian. I would not touch him. It's not worth it. It's a bench slot is so important in fantasy. Don't you feel like people often undervalue the importance of just having a slot that they can work with on their team, having a slot that's not locked up by a guy you can't drop but you can't play? That's the most brutal use of a slot of all.
Man, this past year was so brutal, Dan, as far as injuries goes. I thought that there were guys on my bench in a lot of my teams where I was like, man, I got to try to work a 2-for-1 here because my bench is so deep. But I didn't even need to end up making any deals because I had so many starters go down. And to be able to plug in a solid bench guy into those spots, which I had to do, I feel like, in every single league I was in because of the amount of injuries this season, it was unbelievable. So you're absolutely right, Dan. Bench spots are highly valuable.
Yep. Can't occupy it unless you're planning for 2 seasons down the line. All right, that's our show for today. Adrian, I know I put you on the hot seat there with that last one because it was really my turn and I biffed it. So AB coming in clutch on today's pod. I don't mean to take the rug out from under you either. But don't worry, everybody. Adrian will be back on Friday. You'll be talking to Neil about God knows who. Maybe somebody else will be signed by then. Maybe you'll have Capella or Isaiah Thomas to break down. I'm really looking forward to doing one of those, by the way. Stay cool, my man.
Yes, thank you very much, Dan.
He is Adrian. I am Dan. We are co-hosts of Fantasy NBA Today, your friendly neighborhood one-stop shop for all things fantasy basketball. This is a Hoopball presentation. You can follow us all on Twitter at Dan Besbris, at Adrian Benjamins, at Hoopball Fantasy. And as I mentioned earlier in the show, you can follow our team pods at Hoopball Lakers, at Hoopball Kings, and our other team coverages. They are mostly lying dormant right now. without the podcasts, but they're coming around. And by the way, and I said it late last week as well, I'm teasing it. We're likely to have 2 new podcasts before the start of next season. We'll tell you more about those as we get closer to that day. Have a wonderful Tuesday, everybody. I'll be back at you tomorrow solo. I'll be with Neil on Thursday, Adrian and Neil together on Friday. Have a great day.
This has been a Hoop Ball presentation.